I panicked and blurted out something that even the most lethal alien warrior woman froze. Jonah Steele never imagined that a routine scouting mission would lead to this, standing in front of the most fearsome alien warrior in the galaxy. It all started like any other day in the uncharted part of space. His ship, the Nomad, was in good condition, and his instructions were clear. Survey the nearby planets, document the findings, and return home. Nothing had prepared him for the alien world that awaited. As his ship glided toward the planet, Jonah checked his coordinates. The system was unexplored, the planet itself a speck on the radar. He was told there was nothing special about it. A routine stop, his commander had said. Don't get yourself into trouble. But trouble, as Jonah would soon find, had a way of finding him. When his ship's sensors went haywire just as he entered the planet's atmosphere, Jonah's stomach dropped. He tried to regain control, but the ship's systems malfunctioned, and before he could blink, the world outside spun wildly. The landscape below, a mixture of rocky terrain, forests, and ancient ruins, flashed by in a blur as his ship hurtled toward the ground. The crash was inevitable. Jonah's heart raced, but somehow he managed to brace himself as the Nomad slammed into the planet's surface with a deafening thud. Everything went dark. He came to moments later, his head pounding. The ship was a mess of twisted metal and fire, but miraculously, the hull was intact enough for Jonah to escape. He stumbled out of his seat, dizzy and disoriented, his breath shallow from the chaos. The cold air of the planet hit him like a shockwave. For a moment, Jonah just stood there trying to make sense of the situation. The ship was a wreck and his communication system was down. The planet was vast and alien, the sky a dull gray with dark clouds swirling overhead. It felt like something out of a nightmare. His first instinct was to find shelter, so he set off in the direction of the nearest ridge, hoping to spot some sign of life, or at least an area where he could take refuge and figure out his next move. But as he moved away from the wreckage, he heard something, a soft but unmistakable sound. It was the thud of heavy boots on the ground, the rhythm of someone or something walking with purpose. Jonah froze. He was alone on this planet, or so he thought. His hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, but then he realized with a sinking feeling that it wasn't there. He must have dropped it in the crash. Trying to steady his nerves, Jonah crouched low behind a large rock and peered around its edge. He had no idea what kind of creature or person was out there, but it didn't matter. He had to survive, and the first rule of survival was not drawing attention to yourself. But then he saw her. She was tall, much taller than any human he'd ever seen, with a muscular frame that screamed danger. Her skin was a deep, bluish gray, and her armor gleamed with a dull metallic sheen. A weapon hung at her side, something unlike any firearm Jonah had ever seen, its sleek design intimidating. Her hair, dark and braided, fell in thick waves down her back, and her eyes, bright yellow with slit pupils, swept the landscape like a predator on the hunt. Jonah's breath hitched. The alien woman was a warrior, no doubt about it. The stories he'd heard about the Sci-Fi warriors flashed in his mind. They were known for their brutal strength, their unmatched combat skills, and their merciless nature. The Sci-Fi were a species feared by all across the galaxy. They lived by a strict code of combat, and their warriors were revered as some of the deadliest beings in the universe. Jonah couldn't move. His body was frozen in place, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew he had to be quiet, stay hidden, but somehow his mouth betrayed him. In his panic, he blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. "You can't be that scary with a face like that." The words were out before he could even process them. A moment of complete, utter silence followed. Jonah's eyes widened in horror as he realized what he had just said. His brain screamed at him to shut up, but it was too late. The Sci-Fi warrior, who had been walking with such confidence and power, came to a sudden halt. She stood there, motionless, as if the entire world had paused. Jonah's face turned bright red with embarrassment, and he wanted nothing more than to sink into the ground and disappear. But the alien didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes narrowing. Jonah panicked even more. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, it was a dumb thing to say. I'm sorry, he stammered, his voice cracking. He stepped out from behind the rock, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, hoping to somehow calm the situation. The Zythar warrior, Zara, was still frozen, her gaze fixed on him as if she were processing what he had said. Jonah's heart was pounding in his chest as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. He had to get out of there. He had to run, but his legs felt like jelly. His mind raced with escape plans, but none of them made sense. What could he do? How could he make things right? This was it. The end. But then the warrior spoke. Her voice was low, almost too calm, as though she were trying to understand his words. "What did you say?" she asked, her tone sharp yet oddly curious. Jonah swallowed hard. I said you couldn't be that scary with a face like that. I don't know why I said it, Her eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, and Jonah swore he saw a flicker of something like confusion, maybe even amusement. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating gaze of a warrior who had been trained to show no weakness. "You humans," she said, almost as if speaking to herself. "Strange creatures, and yet you live, you survive." Jonah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He just insulted the most terrifying being he had ever seen, and somehow she hadn't torn him to pieces. Instead, she was studying him as if he were some strange new specimen. He took a shaky breath, not sure what to do next. He had no weapon, no plan, no escape route. But somehow his impulsive words had stopped the warrior from attacking him. It was almost as if his unexpected outburst had thrown her off balance. Zara tilted her head, regarding him with a new level of interest. "You are lucky. No human has ever spoken to me like that, not in such a way." Jonah's mind raced, but his mouth had a mind of its own. "Well, I guess I'm just different." Zara's gaze never left him. "Different," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. "And yet you stand here, you do not flee." Jonah swallowed. I'm not exactly in a position to flee, am I?" She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You are not like the others I have encountered. Most would be cowering in fear by now. You, however, are strange." Jonah could hardly believe what he was hearing. She wasn't going to kill him. She wasn't going to. "What was happening? Why are you here, human?" she asked, her tone steady and unreadable. Jonah was caught off guard by the question. He hadn't even thought of an answer yet. I crashed. "My ship's wrecked," he said quickly, pointing over his shoulder at the twisted remains of the nomad. I didn't expect to run into someone like you." Zara looked over at the wreckage, then back at Jonah. Her expression was unreadable. "I see, a crash." "That is inconvenient." Jonah could only nod. "Yeah, tell me about it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with tension, and Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head. He was supposed to be here to survey a planet, not to survive an encounter with a lethal alien warrior. Jonah opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, Zara's voice cut through the silence. "You will accompany me." Jonah blinked in confusion. "Excuse me." "I will need help," she said, her gaze unwavering. "There is a mission, I cannot complete it alone." Jonah stared at her, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Wait, what? I don't think you want my help." Zara's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no malice in them. "You have already helped by not running. Now you will help me find what I seek. There is no escape, human. You will come with me." Jonah had no idea what he was getting himself into, but in that moment he knew one thing for sure: he was stuck. And maybe, just maybe, his bizarre outburst had just earned him a second chance at survival. Jonah couldn't believe what was happening. The alien warrior, Zara, was standing in front of him, still as intimidating as ever, but instead of threatening to kill him, she was offering him a chance to help her. Help her. After everything that had happened, Jonah was still trying to process the situation. He had just insulted her, and now she wanted him to join her on some mysterious mission. His mind raced with questions, but before he could even form a coherent thought, she turned and began walking away, her heavy boots making firm thuds against the rocky ground. Jonah stood frozen, staring after her. He didn't know whether to run, shout, or simply collapse from the sheer absurdity of it all. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to survive out here alone. Not with no weapon, no ship, and no real idea of where he was. His only option, it seemed, was to follow Zara. He took a deep breath, shook his head in disbelief, and began walking after her. The planet they were on was strange and unsettling. The sky was perpetually overcast, with thick, swirling clouds that blocked out the sun. The air was cold, carrying an eerie, otherworldly scent that Jonah couldn't quite place. It was as though the planet itself was alive, watching him with silent eyes. Zara led the way, her every step confident and purposeful. She moved through the rocky terrain with ease, her powerful legs carrying her over boulders and uneven ground without breaking a sweat. Jonah, on the other hand, was struggling. He was used to the comforts of his ship, to the technology that allowed him to travel through space, not this wild, untamed world. Every step felt like an effort, and more than once he tripped over loose rocks or stumbled through patches of thick, tangled underbrush. But no matter how much he stumbled, Zara didn't slow down. She didn't even look back. Jonah tried to focus on keeping up, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her, Zara, the deadly Zythar warrior. He had seen her in action, and the stories about her kind were true. They were known for their ferocity, their unparalleled combat skills, and their complete lack of mercy. She was a legend in her own right, and here he was, walking behind her like some helpless fool. He couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't killed him. Maybe it was because of his comment, but surely no one would let something like that slide, especially not someone as dangerous as Zara. He had expected her to lash out the moment he spoke those words, but instead she seemed intrigued, confused. Jonah wasn't sure, but it was starting to make him feel even more out of place. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the environment grew harsher. The ground became rockier and the air grew thinner. The sound of the wind howling through the trees filled the silence, and the only other noise was the rhythmic sound of their footsteps. Jonah's legs were starting to ache from the effort of keeping up with Zara, but he refused to fall behind. There was no telling what she might do if he did. After what felt like hours of walking, they arrived at a large, ancient structure. It was built into the side of a mountain, half covered by vines and moss, but still imposing in its scale. The architecture was unlike anything Jonah had ever seen: towering stone columns, intricate carvings, and strange symbols etched into the walls. It looked as though the structure had been abandoned for centuries, but there was something about it that felt alive, as though it were waiting for something. Zara came to a stop in front of the entrance, her eyes scanning the area with sharp precision. She didn't speak, but Jonah could tell she was assessing the situation, looking for any signs of danger. He followed her gaze, but all he saw was the entrance, a massive stone doorway, dark and foreboding. "Is this where you're headed?" Jonah asked, his voice hesitant. Zara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Yes, this is where my mission lies." Jonah felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Something about this place felt wrong, but he wasn't about to question Zara. Not now. He had no choice but to go with her. She had saved his life by not killing him, and now he had to trust her if he wanted any hope of getting out of this situation alive. Without another word, Zara stepped forward and approached the doorway. Jonah hesitated for a moment, but then he followed her, stepping into the shadows of the ancient structure. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. It was eerily quiet, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As they moved deeper into the structure, Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner seemed to hold a hidden secret, Every shadow felt like it was hiding something dangerous. His nerves were on edge, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting something to leap out at him. But Zara was unfazed, walking with the same steady confidence as always. She didn't even flinch as they passed through darkened corridors and into chambers filled with strange, forgotten relics. They finally reached a large central chamber. The walls were lined with towering statues of ancient alien figures, their faces frozen in stern expressions. At the far end of the chamber, on a raised platform, sat a pedestal, and atop it rested a glowing orb. It shimmered with an ethereal light, casting an eerie glow across the room. Jonah stared at the orb, transfixed by its beauty. But at the same time, it filled him with an unsettling sense of dread. Zara walked toward the pedestal, her eyes never leaving the orb. Jonah followed, his steps slower, more cautious. He felt a strange pull toward the object, but his instincts told him to stay away. "This is it," Zara said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "The artifact I seek, the key to saving my people." Jonah swallowed hard. He had no idea what she was talking about, but something told him this was bigger than anything he could understand. The orb seemed to radiate power, and he couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the edge of something much larger than themselves. Zara stepped closer to the pedestal, her hand outstretched. Jonah watched as she carefully reached for the orb, her fingers grazing its surface. The moment her hand made contact, a burst of energy shot through the room, and the orb flared brightly. Jonah jumped back, his heart racing as the light intensified, bathing the chamber in a brilliant glow. "What's happening?" Jonah asked, panic creeping into his voice. He could feel the energy in the air, a strange, electric hum that vibrated through his bones. Zara didn't answer. She was staring at the orb, her expression tense. The light from the orb seemed to pulse, as though it were alive, and Jonah felt his heart race in response. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Jonah stumbled, almost losing his balance, but Zara remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the orb. The tremors grew stronger, the walls shaking as if the entire structure was coming to life. "What's going on?" Jonah repeated, this time with more urgency. Zara turned to him, her face grim. "The artifact is not what it seems. There is more to it than I realized." Jonah's pulse quickened as he looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The chamber was growing darker, the walls closing in on them as if the structure itself was reacting to the orb's power. The light from the orb dimmed, and the air became heavy with tension. Zara stepped back, her hand falling from the orb. The light flickered one last time, then faded entirely, leaving the room in complete darkness. Jonah blinked, trying to adjust to the sudden change. "What just happened? What was that light?" Zara turned to him, her face hard and unreadable. "We have only just begun, human. There is much more to this mission than you understand." Jonah's stomach twisted in knots. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for sure. Things were about to get a whole lot more dangerous. Jonah's heart raced as the darkness swallowed the room. The orb's light had vanished in an instant, leaving only the echoes of the tremors that had rocked the chamber. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, and his legs were shaky, like the ground beneath him could collapse at any moment. But as the silence stretched on, Jonah realized there was only one thing he could do: follow Zara. She moved with purpose, unaffected by the sudden change in their surroundings. Her eyes, still sharp and focused, scanned the room as though she expected something to happen. Jonah, on the other hand, felt like his world had been turned upside down. He had no idea what was going on, what the orb had done, or what it had to do with Zara's mission. But in the presence of this alien warrior, he knew one thing for certain: he had no choice but to stick with her. Jonah took a deep breath and followed Zara as she walked toward the far wall, her hand outstretched. It was then that he noticed something strange. The stone walls of the chamber were no longer as still as they had been. There were faint lines, glowing softly in the dark, tracing the edges of the structure like veins of light. The glow pulsed, faint at first but growing brighter with each passing second. "What's happening?" Jonah asked, his voice hoarse from the tension. His eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling, everything seemed to be shifting. Zara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pressed her hand against the stone wall. The moment she did, the glowing lines flared up, and the entire structure seemed to hum with energy. Jonah could feel the vibrations beneath his feet, a low, deep thrum that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. "Do you feel it?" Zara asked, her voice steady, almost contemplative. Jonah nodded, though he wasn't sure what was going on. "Yeah, what is this place?" Zara didn't look at him. She was focused entirely on the wall in front of her. "This is where it all begins. This place, these ruins, they are not simply relics of the past. They are a key to unlocking the power of the artifact, a key to saving my people." Jonah swallowed, trying to steady his nerves. "What do you mean? What do you need me for?" Her eyes finally shifted to him, but there was no sign of the cold warrior he had first encountered. Instead, her gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Jonah saw something else, something vulnerable, something desperate. "I cannot do this alone. I do not know how to unlock the full power of the artifact. It is not just a weapon, it is much more than that." Jonah wasn't sure what to say. He had no idea how to help her. He was a human, a stranded explorer with no combat skills and no knowledge of alien artifacts. But something in Zara's eyes made him feel like there was more at stake than he could possibly understand. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger, something that could change the fate of entire worlds. "I don't exactly know what you want me to do," Jonah admitted, his voice shaky. "I'm just a guy who crashed on this planet. I don't have any special powers or anything." Zara stepped back from the wall and turned to face him fully. "You do not need powers, human. You only need to trust me." Jonah stared at her, unsure of what to think. Trust her? After everything that had happened, everything he had seen, he wasn't sure he could trust anyone, especially not an alien warrior who had almost killed him for making one stupid comment. But at the same time, something in his gut told him that she wasn't lying. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, that made him think she wasn't just after power or revenge. She was after something bigger, something that mattered. Jonah took a breath. "All right, I'll trust you, but what now?" Zara's lips twitched slightly, almost as if she were fighting a smile. "Now we move forward. There are more ruins, more challenges, and we must face them together." Jonah nodded, his heart still racing, but for the first time since he'd landed on this planet, he felt like he had a purpose. He wasn't just following Zara because he had no other choice. He was following her because he knew something had to be done, and somehow, he was the one who had to help do it. Without another word, Zara turned and headed toward the back of the chamber. Jonah hesitated for a moment, taking one last glance at the pedestal and the now dim orb. The strange lines on the walls continued to glow, though much weaker now, as though they were losing energy. The room felt less alive than it had moments before, the pulse of power fading into the background. Jonah followed Zara, his steps echoing in the vast emptiness of the structure. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the temperature dropped, and Jonah could feel his breath fogging in the cold air. The walls were even more intricate here, covered in ancient symbols and strange, flowing lines that Jonah couldn't begin to understand. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, like they were descending into something ancient, something dangerous. "Where are we going?" Jonah asked after a few moments of walking in silence. Zara glanced over her shoulder. "There is another chamber deeper within. It holds the answers we need, but it will not be easy to reach." Jonah didn't know what she meant by not easy, but he had a feeling he was about to find out. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The walls were now smooth, black stone, and the air felt heavier, as though it was thick with the weight of history. Jonah's senses were on high alert. The silence around them was suffocating, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just his imagination. There was something in the air, something that felt wrong. When they reached the next chamber, Jonah felt it, an intense pressure that seemed to push down on him from all sides. The room was massive, with a high ceiling that stretched out of sight. Strange, glowing symbols were etched into the floor, and at the far end of the room stood a large altar. The altar was covered in dust, but Jonah could see traces of some sort of power, an energy that pulsed softly from within it. Zara stopped just inside the doorway and took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the altar. Jonah could feel the tension in her body, the anticipation of something about to happen. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The final piece." Jonah's mind raced. He had no idea what she meant, but something told him that the artifact, and the power it held, wasn't the only thing they were after. The altar seemed to be calling to him, its power beckoning him closer. He felt a strange connection to it, an invisible pull that drew him in. Without thinking, Jonah stepped forward, his feet moving almost on their own. He reached the altar and placed his hands on its cold surface, feeling the hum of energy beneath his fingers. The room seemed to shift around him, the air thickening, the pressure growing. The symbols on the floor began to glow brighter, and the energy around him crackled with intensity. Zara moved behind him, her presence looming like a silent force. "You are ready," she said, her voice steady and strong. "You must activate it. Only you can do it." Jonah's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't ready. He wasn't qualified. But something deep inside him, something primal, told him he had no choice. The power of the artifact, the fate of Zara's people, the future of the galaxy, everything depended on this moment. Jonah took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Then, with a trembling hand, he touched the center of the altar. The room exploded with light. Jonah's heart felt like it was about to burst as the light exploded around him. It wasn't like any light he had ever seen before. It was bright but not blinding. It seemed to pulse with life, like it had a heartbeat of its own. The energy from the altar surged through his body, and for a moment everything went silent. No sounds, no movement. Just a strange, suffocating stillness that made him feel like he was floating. His hands were still pressed against the cold stone surface of the altar, and he could feel the hum of the energy beneath it. The power was alive. He could feel it in every part of him. The light around him began to shift, coalescing into a strange, swirling pattern that seemed to dance and flicker in midair. Jonah gasped for breath, his body trembling. It was as though the very essence of the ruins had come to life, surrounding him, engulfing him in its force. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed and everything fell silent again. For a few moments, Jonah didn't move. His heart was still pounding, and he could feel the aftershocks of the energy coursing through his veins. The room felt different now. It was still the same chamber, still filled with the ancient markings and the eerie stillness. But the atmosphere had changed. There was something new, something intangible that hung in the air. What just happened?" Jonah whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding in his ears. Zara's voice cut through the silence, calm and steady. "You activated it." Jonah turned to look at her, his eyes wide. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she was standing there with an expression of quiet approval, as though she had expected this all along. It made him uneasy. He had no idea what he had just done. He wasn't some hero. He was just a guy who had made a stupid comment and somehow ended up in the middle of an alien mission he didn't understand. "I activated what?" Jonah asked, his voice shaking. "What is this?" Zara stepped forward, her movements fluid and controlled. The artifact was not just an object. It was a signal, a beacon. "It has chosen you, Jonah Steele." Jonah blinked, trying to wrap his mind around what she was saying. "Chosen me? I'm not anything special. I'm just a guy who crashed on this planet." Zara looked at him with an intensity that made him feel small. The artifact does not choose just anyone. It chose you because you are the key. The power you activated is the power to save my people, the Zythar, and through them, the galaxy. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was more shocked by the enormity of what Zara was saying, or the fact that she was looking at him as though he were some kind of chosen hero. This was beyond anything he had ever expected. He had just been trying to survive. Now it seemed like he was standing on the precipice of something much bigger, something dangerous. "What do you mean, save your people?" Jonah asked, struggling to make sense of it all. "I don't even know what this artifact does." "How could I save anyone?" Zara stepped up to the altar, her hand hovering over the now-still orb. The glowing symbols on the floor were dim, but still visible, like faint traces of light left behind by the power that had been released. "It is not just the artifact itself," Zara explained. "The artifact is part of something ancient. It is a weapon, yes, but it is more than that. It holds the power to reshape the very fabric of life itself. It can restore my planet, heal my people, and bring peace to the galaxy." Jonah swallowed hard. This was too much. He was just a human. He wasn't prepared for this kind of responsibility. He didn't even know how to activate the artifact properly, and now Zara was saying that it had somehow chosen him. "You're saying this thing can change the galaxy?" Jonah asked, still in disbelief. "And I'm the one who's supposed to use it." Zara's eyes were focused on the orb, but her voice was steady. "Yes, it is up to you. The artifact recognizes something in you. Perhaps it is your unpredictability, your willingness to act without thinking. I have seen that many times before in humans. They are unpredictable, yes, but they are also capable of great things." Jonah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wasn't some kind of savior. He was just a guy who had made a mess of everything. He'd gotten himself stranded on an alien planet, made a stupid comment to a deadly warrior, and now, somehow, he was supposed to save the galaxy. It didn't make any sense. "Look, I don't know what you see in me," Jonah said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But I'm not the hero you're looking for. I'm just a guy trying to get out of here alive. I can't—" "Enough," Zara interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You do not have to understand it all, Jonah Steele. All you need to do is trust the artifact. Trust what it has awakened in you. The power is already within you. You just need to learn how to harness it." Jonah didn't respond. He was too lost in his own thoughts. What was he supposed to do now? Zara made it sound so simple, but Jonah didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel like anything special. He was just scared, scared of what was coming, scared of what he was about to do. There was a weight on his chest, like the entire galaxy was resting on his shoulders, and he had no idea how to carry it. The room was silent again, except for the soft, rhythmic sound of their breathing. Jonah didn't know how long they stood there, but it felt like time had stretched into infinity. His mind raced, and he struggled to think of a way out. He wanted to run, wanted to scream, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. The artifact had chosen him, and now there was no turning back. Suddenly, Zara spoke again, her voice low and steady. "There is more we must do. The artifact is a key, but it is not the only key. There are others who seek its power. They will stop at nothing to take it from us." Jonah felt a chill run down his spine. "Others? Who?" Zara's eyes were cold and distant now, her voice hardening. "The Zikar, a warlord race. They have been searching for this artifact for centuries. They will do whatever it takes to control it. If they succeed, they will use its power to destroy everything we know." Jonah's stomach churned. "And you want me to stop them?" Zara nodded. "Yes, you and I together." Jonah didn't know what to say. The weight of her words pressed down on him, suffocating him. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even sure he could survive another encounter with a warrior like Zara. But he could see it in her eyes. She believed in him. She trusted him, and if there was even a chance he could help her people, he couldn't walk away from that. I I don't know how, but I'll try, Jonah said, his voice quiet but determined. I'll do whatever I can. Zara didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. Good, that is all I ask. Jonah took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His heart was still racing, and his thoughts were a jumble of fear and uncertainty, but there was one thing he knew for sure. This was far from over. Whatever lay ahead, he had no choice but to face it. And somehow, he would have to find a way to make it through. The fate of the galaxy and Zara's people depended on it. The journey ahead was anything but clear. Jonah could feel the weight of Zara's words hanging over him like a shadow. The Z-Car, a ruthless warlord race, were after the artifact's power, his power. And as he walked alongside Zara through the ancient ruins, the reality of what he had just agreed to was sinking in. He was part of something far bigger than he had ever imagined, something that could change the galaxy. He glanced at Zara. She was walking ahead, her every step measured and confident. Her eyes were focused, scanning their surroundings with the intensity of a predator. Jonah knew she wasn't just a warrior, she was a leader, someone who had seen things he couldn't even begin to understand. He felt out of place beside her, like a leaf caught in a storm, but he also felt a strange sense of purpose. If he was really the key to stopping the Z-Car, then maybe, just maybe, he could help. The ruins stretched for miles, the stone buildings and broken columns rising out of the ground like forgotten monuments. There was a haunting beauty to the place, ancient, mysterious, and yet alive with energy. Jonah could feel the hum of the artifact within him, a constant reminder that he had been chosen, but he didn't yet understand why. What did it mean for him? What kind of power did he truly possess? Keep your focus. Zara's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and direct. She had slowed her pace and was now walking beside him, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. The Z-Car are ruthless. If we do not stay ahead of them, we will be hunted. They will stop at nothing to claim the artifact. Jonah nodded, his throat tight. I understand. Good, Zara said, but understanding is not enough. You must trust in the power you've activated. It will guide you when you need it most, but only if you allow it. Jonah wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had tried to focus on the artifact's power, but every time he did, it felt like it was just out of reach, like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. How could he trust something he didn't fully understand? As they continued through the ruins, the sky above them grew darker. The clouds had thickened, and the air was heavy with the promise of a storm. The landscape felt eerily quiet, like the calm before a great battle. Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then from the shadows ahead, a low growl broke the silence. Jonah's body tensed. He instinctively reached for his sidearm, but his hand met only empty air. He had forgotten he didn't have a weapon. His heart pounded in his chest and his mind raced. What was that sound? Was it the Z-Car? Were they already here? Zara's hand shot out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. She pulled him behind a crumbling pillar, her eyes scanning the darkness. Stay quiet, she whispered, her voice steady but urgent. They are close. Jonah tried to calm his breath as he crouched low beside her. His ears strained to pick up any movement. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. It wasn't just one creature. There were several, moving in a coordinated manner. Jonah's mind raced. Who were these creatures? Were they part of the Z-Car? Or something worse? Suddenly, a figure stepped into the dim light, its eyes glowing a fierce amber. Jonah's stomach lurched as he recognized the shape of the creature. It was large, much larger than a human, with muscles rippling beneath dark, scaled skin. Its head was shaped like that of a predator, with sharp, elongated teeth visible even in the low light. Zara's grip tightened on Jonah's arm, her eyes locked onto the creature in the distance. The Z-Car have not arrived yet, she murmured. These are the hounds of the ruins, creatures used to protect the ancient artifacts. They will attack without hesitation. Jonah's eyes widened as more figures emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. There were at least 5 of them, circling the area with a predatory grace. Jonah's heart raced as he realized that they weren't just guarding the artifact, they were hunting, and they had already picked up their scent. "They can track us by scent," Zara continued, her voice low. "If they get too close, we will not survive." Jonah's mind was spinning. What were they supposed to do now? He had no weapon, no way of defending himself. But Zara seemed unfazed. She was calm, calculated, her eyes never leaving the hounds. Jonah had to trust her, he realized. She had the experience. She knew how to survive in a world like this. And maybe, just maybe, she knew how to use the artifact's power. "Stay close to me," Zara whispered. "Do exactly as I do." Jonah nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't sure what Zara had planned, but he wasn't about to argue. They had to get out of there. With a sudden burst of speed, Zara darted out from behind the pillar and into the shadows, her movements like a blur. Jonah followed, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He could hear the hounds growling behind them, their claws scraping against the stone floor as they closed in. They ran through the ruins, weaving between crumbling columns and over broken walls. Jonah's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning from the exertion. He could hear the hounds' growls growing louder, feel their presence closing in. But Zara was leading them with confidence, her sharp eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of escape. Suddenly, she stopped in front of a narrow passageway between 2 collapsed walls. Without hesitation, she grabbed Jonah's arm and pulled him through the gap. The narrow passage was dark and tight, and Jonah had to crouch low to fit, but Zara was already ahead of him, moving like she had done this 1,000 times before. The sounds of the hounds grew fainter as they moved deeper into the passage. Jonah's lungs burned from the sprint, and his legs felt like jelly, but he kept going, desperate to stay close to Zara. She was the only one who knew what to do next. He had to trust her. He had to believe that she had a plan. The passage finally opened into a small chamber, its walls lined with strange markings and symbols that Jonah couldn't begin to understand. The air was thick and musty, and the chamber seemed to hum with an ancient energy, just like the artifact had. Zara stopped at the center of the room and turned to face him. "This is a safe place," Zara said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We can rest here, but we will not stay long. The hounds will circle back, and when they do, we need to be ready." Jonah's heart was still racing, but he managed to nod. "What do we do now?" Zara glanced around the chamber, her gaze searching for something. "There are hidden paths beneath this place. The Z-car will not find us if we use them." She moved to a wall near the far side of the chamber and pressed her hand against the stone. Jonah watched as a section of the wall slowly shifted, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. "Come," she said. "This way." Jonah hesitated for only a moment before following her. As they descended the staircase, the temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy with the weight of ancient secrets. Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to something important, something that could change everything. The staircase led them into another chamber, even darker than the last. This one felt different, more alive, more charged with energy. Jonah's skin prickled as they stepped into the room, and he could feel the power of the artifact growing stronger, thrumming in the air around them. Zara moved to the center of the chamber and stopped in front of an ancient-looking pedestal. It was empty for now, but Jonah could see that it had been used before. There were faint traces of energy, like a residue left behind by something powerful. "This is it," Zara said quietly, turning to Jonah. "The final part of the puzzle. The last piece we need to stop the Z-car." Jonah's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew one thing: they were close now, close to whatever it was that would change the galaxy. "We're ready," Jonah said, his voice steadier than he felt. Zara nodded. "We are," and together they prepared for what would come next.